want it to be, we want you to participate in our discussion. We want to hear your ideas and your thoughts. That's why we're here. That's why we're doing this. But first, the two main questions that we're going to address in here today are how can we manage the documentation team better? And how can we make our documentation set as a whole better? How can we make the content better? They're both kind of our two main sore spots, I think, really.
What else do we do?
Yeah.
The team and its product.
The team and its product, yeah.
Covers it.
So, but just to give you a little bit of background, if you're not, if you haven't been paying attention over the last year and a half, we had a really good sprint at Google during the .com sprint, and
Was that 2 years ago now?
no, a year and a half. I know. Out of that sprint, we ended up redesigning the doc page to what it is now. We've since done another redesign that will soon be on plone.org once it
As
gets
soon as we have Plone
upgraded.
3.
Yeah, any day now. We also came up with an idea to have editors because, well, we're managing content. We have a content management system. Why don't we actually fill that editor role? And we are slowly starting to implement that idea, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. We're also toying with the idea, and maybe it's just me that's toying with it, but we're talking about having a little bit stricter standards for docs, putting in a little bit more QA on them, making sure that they are quality and that they're actually meeting your needs. So, let's start. What
I
do
can
you guys
say
wanna
something
talk
about what
it?
you just said, actually.
Okay, go
We're
for
talking
it.
about higher standards and that sort of thing. And I'll go out on a limb and say I'd like to lower standards for docs.
Really?
Yeah, I would actually like to lower the standards.
How so?
Well, I've just
Can
to
we
give
get-
it,
Too damn
since
helpful.
first
If
time
this seems
talking,
too
I'll
clubby for you, just come up here and join in.
yeah, come on up. It should be a big boff, basically. It's just small enough.
Yeah.
So just as a point of introduction, my name is Eric Rose. I work at the Webline team, and we run a lot of our own documentation. We have a 300-page open access wiki that anybody can edit. And it's worked out very well for us. And because our standards are so low, our standard is, can you figure out how to type it in and click save? We get a lot of new pages started. And then what we have is, like Joanna said, a big pile of editors who comes along, and since we live in there 40 hours a week, we clean it up, we garden. So open editing with a couple of dedicated gardeners seems to be a good pattern for us. What's the rest of the
How
think about that?
does the wiki work for you organizational wise?
We wish we had a CMS. I mean, a flat namespace, we tend to bump our heads sometimes. We wish we had metadata. We wish we could tag this, for 2.5 only, for 3.0 and up, that kind of thing. Obsolete. So that's a pain point. But the editing seems to work out quite well. Actually, we don't get as many outside contributions as we would like.
But surely your editors have standards.
Our editors have standards, absolutely. We don't stop people from putting stuff live because they don't meet the standards. We simply fix it fast.
So you don't stop them from putting stuff live. You just change it after they put it live.
We fix it promptly. We have an IRC bot rigged up, and we hang out in this IRC channel all day long. And whenever someone edits, it goes by, hey, somebody changed this URL. Oh, what do they do? Oh, that sucks. But this is the wrong page to have it on. Let's move it. That's what happens more often.
So, I mean, it works well for you because you were there all day, every day
You need
in a
gardeners.
work environment. But more for, in our case, specifically for plone.org, we're not all there all
You mean
the time.
you leave the Plone
I
IRC
know.
channel?
Yeah, what's the matter with you?
All right.
So if you don't have gardeners, you're going to have weeds, right?
Right, exactly.
If
and
you
it's
use the
one of
mic, then
things
they'll get you on the recording.
nobody
Or
wants
you
to
can
get
shout
on.
really loud.
Or we can just repeat your question,
Yeah.
too. I mean, it's going to be hard to have a conversation if
That's a
everybody
good
has to
idea.
walk up there.
Yeah.
I have a question. Could each of you state a documentation source, something documented on the web, another system, another framework that you hold up to be a good model of system software framework documentation?
I love the Ubuntu document set. I have never had a problem finding anything that I
You're
need.
supposed to repeat my question.
Oh, such a good moderator. What is another source of documentation on the web that we see as a good example as a source of documentation?
And you like Ubuntu?
I like Ubuntu.
Well, interestingly enough, I was going to say Debian.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, the reason it works for Debian is it moves a lot slower than Plone does. So they write something that kicks ass and they leave it for 5 years.
Yeah.
But it's very readable, very well organized. And you know what to trust. You know it's canonical.
The only one I can think of is, I haven't seen the latest version, but the old Facebook API documentation. That was really well laid out. I could find what I wanted really easily, drill down to API calls, and if I needed it, I could go to a test bed linked directly from the API definition.
I don't particularly have a choice, but I was talking to Tarek Ziadeh last night, and he was mentioning the Sphinx system, which is used by Python.org. I haven't really looked too closely at it, but I think it's definitely worth looking at in the sense that, we do need to start capturing more data. We need to be able to maybe have some more commenting or something other than just comments at the bottom of the page that help judge the quality. And maybe, some different sort of workflow so it's a little more open. The other thing I want to point out is that we have somebody on the documentation team right now who's been working, I believe, with the Ubuntu documentation, and that's Israel Santa Perez. And so that might be a really good resource, as far as like someone to tap for some ideas.
That's
Oh,
Duke
good.
Buddy on IRC.
Correct.
Oh, okay. I didn't know we worked on that.
And I could pick various things. For one of the unique problems of the Plone documentation is that it needs to apply to everything, or needs to be useful for everybody from end users, just strictly viewing it as a place where they're entering information, up to core level developers who need it themselves for some of the documentation. I think for authoritative documentation, the MySQL documentation is just amazing. They break it off between versions. You know which version you're looking at. For a programmer, it's great. It's all there. I can always figure out what to do. I like PyPy actually a lot. I mean, as a programmer, in a way, I think the API documentation problem is in the course of solving itself, because the Python community is forming a better culture of self-documenting, and that's showing up in the PyPy pages. And I've actually been wondering if the documentation team may in the long run have much less of a need to be documenting API type things. Maybe we won't need a reference manual, the equivalent of the archetypes reference manual, because PyPy's doing such a good job and we're becoming more modular.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm stuck with some problem in Plone, I always go on PyPy first, see what the doc tests are. If that's not helpful, I go on Google Code Search. I don't use the Plone.org documentation myself. There's a few little bits like the archetypes field and widget reference and the core development manual that I know are there and I can dip into, but the rest of the time, to be honest, I find it faster to just grep the source, which is a big problem.
Yeah, I can actually second that. I grep the source, and first I try Googling, and I never go to plone.org and use the search there.
It was too
I'm
slow.
sad. You guys are gonna make me cry.
I mean, when Google is a superset of it.
Yeah.
Let me also mention in relation to documentation problems, the meltdown of plone.org has been a very serious problem for the
certainly has
documentation
been.
team.
It really has.
I think there was actually a point at which we were doing much better, simply because plone.org was responsive. A year and a half ago. A year and a half ago, we had a sprint where everybody was sitting there pounding at plone.org all the time, and it didn't slow down. Think about a comparison with now. Think about,
Tomorrow may be a problem for us.
as one of the people who works the review stack, or the review queue, it's painful to work the review queue right now, even to just do that elementary thing. And the process of going back and forth with an author several times with changes is excruciating right now because of how long it takes. And my main reason for saying that is I think that will improve, and then we need to get our organization back together again after we've got a responsive plone.org for people to work with.
Right, I'll second that. I mean, I don't make casual edits anymore just because it takes forever.
Yeah,
It's not casual.
You can browse the site fine if you're not logged in, but to edit things you have to log in and then go and make a cup of tea and come back and it might have loaded.
So can you speak, Steve, to whether or not you think that the Plone Help Center is still an appropriate choice for a tool? Do you feel like it offers the functionality we need, or should we start looking at maybe some add-on products that are not Plone-based? I mean, is a content management system really sufficient for this purpose?
Well, I think it's sufficient for some of the purpose. I don't think we need to move outside Plone, but the pet idea I've been playing with for a bit is that the documentation team might narrow its focus to producing definitive documentation.
That's
The
definitely
immediate
direction I
user's
wanna go.
manual, and then documentation that guides people on the API and how to find information on the API. And then we might open up more what is now our how-to space and our FAQ space, and basically make it so that any logged-in member of the site could edit freely in there. And in fact, we discourage leaving comments at the bottom. You see something wrong, you fix it. So there we're sort of blending a responsibility portion in the tutorials and in the manuals. We would be taking responsibility as a team for making sure that that's accurate, while creating more of a free-for-all, but that would also then be more responsive in other areas of the site, more wiki-like. We don't even have to use wiki semantics.
No, that doesn't
if we
matter.
just open it up for everyone to edit.
I don't really think that that's such a good idea, because at the moment I think it is already like that. You have many people just putting in stuff, maybe they can't edit it and fix it, but everybody has a different idea of how to do what, and you get
Yep.
10 different opinions for the same thing, in 10 different documents that have actually 10 different subjects altogether. So I would actually go for more control. I think last year we talked in the doc team about Naples, about having these kind of, I'm using the word champions, but that's wrong. The kind of like shepherds was the word.
Yes, and we've been using the word editors.
Right.
Okay, so that there's one person that has a kind of an area of the documentation under it, like Joanna, who's not super technical, I suppose, but she has someone that she can talk to in the core developers who will actually know a lot about that, whom she can ask, I don't know anything about this, I checked the grammar and everything, everybody could understand this, is it actually true?
Yes.
Could you just fly over this and tell me if there's crap in there? And then you can go back and forth. So I'm not for the open thing. I think we have too much documentation already. That gives you too many routes to get
Okay.
to.
Joanna, can you repeat the question, please? I was joking.
Oh, all right.
Actually, we're well underway at trying to implement an editor's system. We don't have all of the areas covered yet, but we've been appointing people. Matt did a fantastic example of surveying one of the documentation topic areas.
Not finished yet.
Not
Neither's
finished
mine.
yet. And I don't think there's any disagreement at all about the need to prune in addition to add. And when I say I'm thinking that we could sort of have a definitive and then a more open documentation area, the definitive area needs to cover best practices. And we should
Yes.
never, ever accept a document where we're not satisfied that it's best practice and that the security is adequate.
Right.
But on the other hand, if we have a best practices coverage of how to do rewrite rules for Apache, then I think it's okay if in another area that is clearly an open area, we have people showing 10 different ways to do it.
And I think we need to encourage gardeners, because when we have these 10 how-tos, I want to do everything we can to encourage people to refactor and combine them and throw out the duplication and get them down into
Right.
one reference manual type thing.
Part of that as well is that if you look at, say, Wikipedia, right, which is, some people have their gripes about it, but it's reasonably successful because one page represents one topic. So your problem is that you've got multiple different ways of doing things, and currently the docs, phone docs say, they encourage a point of view where you put only one way of doing it.
They encourage ownership.
They encourage, like, here's a how-to on how to do X, Y, and Z using this technology, with this combination of whatever.
Right.
Instead of saying, how do I solve the problem, and then having all the different ways on one page. So if you had everything on one page, then, the collective ownership and the openness might work a bit better in the same way it does with Wikipedia.
Might take it away from sort of a cookbook. I have this OS and this version of Plone and this set of products, and turned into more of a generally useful thing. And I think a major source of our current problem, where we have 12 of these things, is that the ACL model encourages ownership. You make a page, and well, only you can edit it, and the doc team, and that's it. And if you take the brakes off a little bit in this open area, for example, as Steve is talking about, that should slack off.
You mentioned metadata as a way to make the documentation more easy to find what you're looking for. I was wondering if you could just brainstorm now or run through a list of some of the different metadata aspects that you're thinking about.
Plone version it's applicable to, whether it's obsolete or not. It's handy to know when it was last edited or last stamped. Yeah, that's right.
When was it last reviewed?
Yeah.
What about a best practice?
Everything should be a best practice.
Ideally, everything on plone.org should be a best practice. We know it's not like that. But then we get into the issue of who decides what's a best practice. Because there are, 10 different ways to accomplish essentially the same goal.
Right, we've been acting more like the
Yeah.
Perl community than the Python community, I'm afraid.
So, it kind of gets us into the whole issue of, okay, so now we're not just documenting things, we're trying to force people into a way of doing things that they may or may not agree because we are only provide that kind of documentation, and I don't think we want to. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I disagree with the use of the word force. I think implicit in having tutorials or guidelines, that's implicitly really close to being a best practice advocacy anyway. And it
Right.
doesn't mean that you may not say, there are other ways to do things that may be more applicable, but certainly for newbies, speaking as one, it is really nice to
I
be
know.
told, you know what?
This is
If
how
you're
you do
gonna-
it.
If you're going to learn it for the first time, learn this way and do it this way.
Learn it right,
Right.
and then get more creative later on.
Also, a best practice is not necessarily the most optimal engineering solution to a problem. A
Right.
best practice is one that is supported by the community. So, this is part of what we've been working on installers. The idea is that if things are in the same path and in the same places and with the same terminology, then when somebody comes on plone.org and says, I'm having a problem with my install, there's a good chance that there will be 10 people, not plone.org, but Plone IRC, who will actually know what they're talking about. If we have 45 ways of doing things, a la the Perl community, then somebody comes on and we spend 10 minutes finding out from them how they laid out their build out.
And like Steve says, I think a lot of this comes out of the fact that there are 5 equally recommended ways of doing some things in Plone right now. It's not the documentation that's the root of the problem. It's the
I think at some point we
universe.
just need to make a decision and decide, okay, that yes, this is the supported best practice way.
Right.
Yeah, but what
And
Steve's
so
doing with
Alex
the installer
Leamy
is
is
a great
wrong
step.
about Apache rewrite rules.
Say that again?
I said, Alex Leamy is wrong about Apache rewrite rules.
Why? What does he say?
Well,
He says use reverse proxy.
okay.
You mean like proxy pass?
Yeah,
Yeah, stop that.
yeah.
You had a question?
Yeah, it was just, actually, it goes back to what, before you guys started that. The thing with you mentioned something about an area, I don't know, you were thinking about 2 areas for the documentation, that's one section where people just add their stuff, and one section that is kind of the
Blessed.
abstractions from those things. Is it best practice or not? Is it actually really good? We're making it even better, and then we're putting it into an official space. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yes, and also where we would have, for example, I think we should only have one batch of end user documentation.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not something we should open up wildly. That should be polished. It should have illustrations on it.
And it should be delivered with every new release.
I think that goes for every target group,
Right, but what I mean is I wouldn't encourage development of end user documentation in the Wild West space. I think we should encourage the development of end user documentation in the space where we've got people who are technical editors by occupation actively working on the documents. So I think we should really take responsibility for that. But on the other hand, having a much more open and easy contribution framework for when people are solving technical problems and showing alternative ways to do things would just allow us to be more agile as a community.
Let me ask a question of the panel. In reply to Steve's proposal of a Wild West space and a non-Wild East space, I kind of lean toward Wild Westing everything and then having a big approved stamp of some kind. You know, doc team approves revision 86 of this thing. We didn't used to be able to do that because we didn't have Plone 3 and we didn't have history tracking. You know, you edit something and the old version's gone. It's a very risky way to run your life.
It's a horrible
the
way
reason-
to manage your content.
You can't manage content that way, and the reason our wiki works is that there's history, you never lose anything. So, the question I ask is, I heard rumblings before I had gotten onto the doc team that we tried the Wild West thing once, and it was a disaster. Is that true, or did I make this up?
You know that I think that we've got on this panel a grand total of 2 years history.
Yeah,
Okay.
we would need to ask somebody who was involved on the doc team
Yes,
longer
before
than that.
before it was even a doc team.
Yeah, we would really have to talk to like Martin or Darcy and ask.
Is anyone like that here? Yeah.
Well, I mean, and just to kind of get back to what you're saying, I think that there really is some value in saying, you know, we bless this documentation because all we have right now are the start here documents, which doesn't really cover the entire spectrum of what we would actually recommend. Like, you know, I edit the visual theming section, and I can say definitively that there are probably 4 or 5 things that I would love to say, you know, this is a really good document, but I have no way to flag that right now, and I have no way to bury the others, and so I think that that's a really good point. Like, maybe that extra metadata would be something that we
Well,
could use.
and I'd say
then
we should take
and
the,
then take the others and Wild West them.
Well, and
Perhaps the
it-
best practice label is something that we could use is that. Best practice.
Well, that was the idea behind the little gold star.
Yeah, but
That was
all
what
those
gold star
images
mean. Does it mean it's worth
is
1
it?
star? Does it mean it's
Okay.
no good?
Well, and I think it goes back to, again, talking about whether or not PHC is an appropriate,
Thing.
product to be using to handle our documentation.
What's wrong with a folder full of pages
Well, it's...
with some keywords?
People weren't able to find
Okay,
things.
hold on.
We had a question over here
Yeah,
for a
but
long
hold on.
time.
You've been waiting for a
Okay.
while. You keep raising
And
your
then we'll
hand.
go over
so-
it here with-
And then
Yeah.
Gabby, and then...
Is it a good idea to introduce a rating system?
A rating system is
Maybe.
something we've definitely toyed with.
Maybe like sucks, then it automatically disappears in the documentation after a few months or so?
Okay, so you want a rating system. Can you give an example of a rating system that works really well for you right now? Not necessarily in Plone, just at all.
And is not an editor the kind of person who would actually know the reality of that and like have the context to be able to make that call, that judgment call, without extra functionality?
there was a load of talk last year as well about having a rating system for products on plone.org, and there was a lot of brainstorming went into that, and nothing actually came of
It's
it.
still coming.
It's
Oh.
waiting for Plone 3.
Yeah.
I mean, in 2.5, there's no good efficient way to do ratings.
But we were talking about different checkboxes for this product is best practice, it has tests, and there are so many things you can come up with, but then condensing that down into a number is very difficult. So.
I think we can think about this all day long and try to put coefficients in front of things and come up with a big number. But I don't think there's a lot of history and research that goes into that. I mean, maybe we ought to start with just the simplest thing that could possibly work, and when it sucks, we make corrections.
Yeah.
Do it iteratively.
Somehow we've got to get the 3.0 documentation on the site right now. I mean, I love Webline, but I think that really started an ugly trend because pretty much right now I can say that definitively almost none of the 3.0 documentation made it onto plone.org. And that is really embarrassing. We do not even have a decent get started with build out. And, you know, I'm sure you guys have it. But
Yes,
we
we
need
have
to
a couple
find
of them.
some way to bring that stuff back.
Martin
We're
might
down to one
disagree.
now. We did gardening the other day.
I know. I found it.
Okay, it's been too long. I'm sorry.
Actually, this may lead in a little bit to what I was going to say, and I think that this idea of having a more open space with editors looking at it and improving it and such like that is a very good idea, because a lot of like we were saying, I think you were also saying before, a lot of us when we're looking for docs end up using Google and not looking at plone.org, and there's nothing like that out there. I mean, if you're finding some doc on Google, how do you know if it's good, if it's obsolete, if it's what version it works for, or anything like that? And if we have like a more open space within the plone.org, it gives us the opportunity to mark that and have these kind of editorial statements made about it.
What we do on
I mean,
Webline, for example, which is mostly a trust repository,
Yeah.
is we'll have a build-out page, for example, and then we'll link to, this is the best build-out thing ever, and it could well be on plone.org.
Yeah, but I mean that's something that could work as well. But I think that it's just interesting when we're talking about the wild West and whatever else is going on. I think that there's even something beyond the wild Wild West, that there's like, you know, the untamed wilderness of the internet that, you know, that is always going to be there. And if that's the best resource that we have, which in some ways it is now, I mean, the Wild West looks pretty good.
One of the most successful things that we did last year was incorporate the Learn Plone website into the end user manuals, and it went very smoothly. And our documentation is more robust on that side of things because of that.
Yeah, and Ann Botel also contributed the theming manual, which was previously on an external website as well. I mean, I think that maybe she intended that to be for internal use. I can't really say. But, you know, it's a really great addition, and I think that there's so many things out on the wikis that we could totally bring back.
Yeah.
There's no reason why not.
Okay.
As long as the history tracking is there and the world readability is there, we will move onto your site.
Okay, Gabrielle.
Well, I also like the idea of rating articles because it's an open source community. I think everybody I kind of agree with Eric that a lot of people should contribute content and just let the community just vote for what is good and what is not, what is helpful, what is not. That's what Amazon is doing, and they're pretty successful with their rating system.
Wikipedia, vote with your pencils.
I hate wikis.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a wiki.
It's so wikis are so anti-content management.
Talk to me about that. You
It's-
mean the flat namespace?
It's just you can't organize it, you can't group it.
I'm not saying that it has to be
It's
a
all
wiki
just on
or
the
a
same
flat.
level.
Right. The flat organization is not one of the things that I say, yes, this is great. It's actually a downside.
Right.
The upside is the world writability. The upside is the easy editability. That's what I'm talking about. And the history tracking.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay.
One aspect of that is that you can open up the editing. You don't have to open up the creation.
That's true.
You can review. If someone
That's
wants
very
to create
true.
a new page, that can be reviewed. And after that, it's edited. It's everyone can edit.
Might be interesting.
Yeah.
Just talk. Yes.
I also want to say I'm in favor of some kind of rating system. I think a simple +1, -1 is better than nothing at all.
Sure.
And we can make
Python
it very
does.
simple, and maybe things don't disappear with a negative rating or a low rating, but at least there would be some indicator of what the community feels about certain documents. The second comment I want to make is that if a best practices tag or section or whatever is something that you decide wouldn't be appropriate, another model to take would be what good bookstores do, which they have staff picks, right? So
Yeah, best practice.
You could have individual staff picks
Oh.
of each one of you, and maybe even in separate sections or separate tags, and that way you
Kind of build up this web of trust sort of thing.
Sort of, yes, right.
I think that's assuming
There
people
are
trust
plenty of
us.
examples of that working.
Web of distrust. Who likes this? It must be terrible.
Let me say something just for a moment about rating systems versus a different kind of review. One of the things that the documentation team claims it's doing, and one of the things we've asked our editors to be doing, is to be reviewing content with the people who are actually developing the particular areas that are worked on. We've accumulated a fair amount of misinformation in plone.org where people have posted things that worked, but that were out of keeping with the direction in which Plone was going. Some of those documents became very popular documents. They became the ones that people referred to if somebody asked a question on IRC. If we had had a rating system, they would have bubbled up to the top of the rating system with a bullet while advising people to go in directions that were going to cause things to break with the next version of Plone.
I would suggest that the problem there is not the rating system, it's the vacuum in which that erroneous information was posted.
For example, they should have said in the article, look, this is for Plone 3.x and not higher? Or what do you mean?
Well, no,
This
it
should be
should have.
something for the new one.
It shouldn't be on plone.org.
If
It should
there's a
be
vacuum for
elsewhere.
information and someone rushes in to fill
I
it
see.
that is not as
Glued in.
informed as they should be, I think that the high rating that would have gotten is a symptom, it's not the problem.
Gotcha.
It's something that should have been caught in the first place.
Just
and
shout.
fixed. Yes, go.
Yeah, just don't stop raising your hands.
Content ratings you're having. You asked which rating system is out there. From
But I mean,
Does it decay?
Sorry?
Does it decay the ratings?
Okay.
Does it have a half-life?
Yes.
But it hooked into like the byline portlet or something.
Yeah.
There's an incredible conservatism to rating systems that don't decay the old ratings. The popular documents become more popular over time. It's the Google effect writ large.
I don't know if it does that.
Yeah.
It's from Alec Mitchell and it's completely modular. sure you can put it in there, or you can ask him to put it in there. He'll do it in 5 minutes.
Okay.
When I asked the question, it wasn't so much,
I'll
does
ask
anyone
them.
know a product, but does anyone know a deployed rating system? You know, what YouTube does, what Google does, what Amazon does works well, you think? Okay.
I couldn't buy a book with that.
Okay. We should learn from that.
Next thing, I don't approve of the approve button.
What approve button?
This is a
stamp.
This is a good best practice.
Ah.
I don't think that makes sense because we have the stars now, and I don't think it's a good thing. You should have a closed section that is only editable by people like you, and well, I'm in the doc team as well.
What the hell do I know?
And extract things, move them over there, and maybe delete the old document if they talk to the author or something, where the best practices get caught. And that's a place where newbies go first and check. And then if they have special needs, they will go into the wild, but they will know they're in the wild then. And the difference is once you just approve of something, and then you have it in the Wild West somewhere, maybe highlighted a little bit, but then you might get to a place where there's too many of them, and you still don't have them in a certain.
I agree. It should be segregated in some
structure.
fashion. Like start here documents and those that are approved would not necessarily even need to have markers if we just at least move them separate from the rest of the documents that are a little more edgy.
Yeah, so 2 sections of it.
I have a question. You talk a lot about best practice, and what I understand best practice is for different people, for different purposes, different. You know, if you make a site quickly for a library, I don't know, a small kind of thing, and you don't want to learn the whole thing, maybe it is best practice to know the short way to reach to that result. So that thing, I think it's very important also to have that in a, as a tag somewhere. You know, is it something long-term, repeatable, or is it something that you just want to have a site that works within a reasonable time?
It's actually very good. The skinning is like a very good example for that. Do you do ZMI or do you not do
Are you a
ZMI?
tourist or are you here to stay kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yes, right, yeah. What is your skill, when best practice, what I tried best practice, and it doesn't bring me to a result within a year, it's not best practice for me.
I know. And as a community, and this isn't just the documentation team, but as a community, we've made some mistakes about that. I mean, there was a time in the history of Plone when every time you asked a question, people would say, never ever do it through the web. And it was because some of the people, who worked on very large sites and really needed repeatability had really found themselves in some traps that way. But we, for some period of time, were giving the wrong answer to people that were working with Plone at a different level. And we do need to be sensitive to that. I can't think of a systematic way to do it because the community will continue to make mistakes.
Let me suggest a more...
John Stahl.
I sort of just dropped in, but I have a radical suggestion I'll just throw out there to spark some discussion.
Awesome.
That's what you're for, John.
Okay.
Bring it.
And this is coming from sort of other conversations on this topic I've had over in the nonprofit technology consultant sector. Something we realized a few years ago was that using the phrase best practices is a bad idea. And if I got to choose, I would actually ban that particular phrase because I think it obscures more than it reveals. I think there are some bad practices I think we can agree, probably. There are some practices that I think we would generally agree are good. For a given thing, there may well be several things that we can agree are good for different circumstances. And I think if we focus only on what's best, it prevents us from seeing the idea that, there sometimes are multiple good answers, and which one is most appropriate depends, as Harita said, on your circumstances, or are you a tourist, or who you are, or whatever. So.
Let me violently agree with you, John.
Okay.
And in fact, that is just what I was going to say, so you're very timely.
That's why I've not participated in this conversation, because I hate the term best practice.
Yeah, well, let me bend the conversation into a brick wall. So what if instead of this flat, yes, it is a best practice, or no, it isn't sort of thing, we do, something Joanna might approve of. We use a hierarchy, we use a scent of information, we have paths through the site, where you get to a certain page, and this page tends to be about installing Plone, for example. And it'll say, you probably ought to use build out, blah, 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 blah. Here's the 2.5 cases where you might not want to. And then you have these rich semantics instead of just, yes, more of this, less of this.
That gets onto the navigating around the documentation area. I mean, as it is, it's very difficult to find something that's specific to the version of Plone and the operating system that you use. I mean, when I was going through the configuration and setup section and seeing what we've got there were so many documents that were only valid for Plone 2.1 on Windows, and those instructions weren't covered in any other version or operating system. So once we've actually got those there, we need to make it easy for people to find the correct one and not the very similar one. And there's so many ways that you can navigate around the site. So you may want to say, I'm looking to start up a Plone instance, and you want to search by your skill set rather than your operating system. So we can't just have a simple hierarchy. There has to be rich searching.
Well, that's why, how the documents are physically stored in page C right now. I mean, they're stored by the content type, not by the subject.
We all agree that's silly.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the best things that Vita has done for us is to help at least change it visually when you go to look at the plone.org page and you're not seeing all the how-tos here and all the tutorials here. You're looking at it by topic.
I think another symptom of using Plone for our documentation, which I think is a fine thing, but I think we end up finding docs more by search and metadata when that's not appropriate. For example, like the only way to find some things is find me Windows stuff about installing Plone 2.5, and you find all this, these 10 documents and you don't know when they should be used. And if we don't have a piece of metadata that fits you exactly, you're pretty much out of luck and you have to read each one. What I'd like to see more of is landing pages. All right, you want to install Plone? All right, you want to install it on Windows? Click. All right, you want to install it for production or for playing around? Click. And then away you go, and you have these sort of rich semantics. We have, language for a reason, and I find that landing pages that wrap a link in 2 sentences of prose tend to make people pogo stick back and forth less.
So are your landing pages just the collections content type then?
It's a page. It's a page with links.
Okay, but the links aren't dynamically generated based on a tagging scheme.
In my case, I have a track wiki, so we don't have that luxury. But the implementation is up to the reader.
I think it also goes in with, I don't know which one said about the Wikipedia thing, that they have information in one source, and I think we're talking about that 1.5 years ago, about single sourcing things, and then we agreed, okay, I didn't agree, but everybody else agreed, that it was just not possible to get the community to do that. But then we didn't have the outlook of having 2 sections. I would think if we had the one section, that is the editors only section, that extract information from other documents and put them there, just make sure that it's a module. It's a modular information that you can recycle in other things. Of course, the wording will change, but it's not going to show up as one large document, and you will not see it as something where somebody who doesn't, who has a different writing style, where these things change. That doesn't matter, I think. But the information is on one spot. Even when you want to update, it's in one spot. And the other thing you have is trails, like the landing pages, that are basically just, I would say, references or something. We would have to look into new concepts. You could do it now with a page of links, but you wouldn't get.
We're actually working on that right now.
But if you have this thing, you can create different trails that, they have this and this and this, and then this goes here, but this goes also here, and this one's recycled. And then you can add versioning information to that one thing, and you're done. You have trails with versioning information, they will automatically.
You are right, Christian Snyder.
I think.
That works really well for us in our system. And I think the wiki culture actually helps toward that. If you spent time on the C2 wiki, for example, ignoring the gigantic thread mode things that happen, each page has very tight semantics. For example, I have a page called Use WebLine Hosting Repositories. And all it tells you is how to hook up your Debian machine to use our Debian repository. That's it. It's always going to mean that. The title means that it means that. And so if you ever use that phrase in a document, well, it's straightforward English-like, it's straightforwardly linked to the page, and the page will always be up to date.
I have an issue. Yeah, I know we're almost out of time.
Wow.
I have an issue with Trails. I know. I have an issue with Trails because I think it's a solution to a symptom that we're not addressing, and it goes back to how we're storing our documents. We don't store them in a logical order so that you can click something like next? Okay, I just read about this. Now how do I build my knowledge and go to something else? Trails is the quick and dirty solution to that, and I really think it's more of a we need to physically rearrange things.
Yes. Could surely explain what you mean with trails? I think we're meaning something
And
different.
I wasn't advocating trails,
Okay.
just for the record.
Okay.
Let me just say, we are actually at 2:15 now, and so people are going to be coming into this room. We need to think about,
Okay.
other people will be leaving this room. Joanna's leading a documentation sprint this weekend. The conversation continues. And everybody here, I mean, obviously, we've just been tossing out bundles of ideas, and we aren't forming anything coherent. But think about them and bring them to the documentation sprint. Come up with your ideas, bring them to the list. And in particular, think about ways that are maintainable. The documentation team is completely volunteer. We're unlikely to have anybody paid working on it for any period of time. So whatever schemes we come up with have to be incredibly easy to maintain. And we can find people to do technical work to help maintain them. But still, I mean, anything that's going to take a lot of work to keep going finally won't get done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of our goals for tomorrow is to create a specific roadmap with obtainable goals and set deadlines for it so that we can actually make some real progress and just saying, yeah, we'll get around to it. Okay, we'll do it when we have time. We're at a point where as a community we need to make time to do this because documentation is so visible. It's a direct road into Plone, the software, and Plone, the community. And it needs to be as much of a priority as the software is.
We're also going to have a while things will be settling down because 3 is going to be
Yeah.
stable for a good while.
Good.
Say one more thing. What I like about the web line versus the plone is also that it's not personalized. It gives me a complete different how to say feeling or understanding than when I see this is written by this person. He wants to throw out his best practice and this person throws out his best practice. And when it's not personalized, I have the impression that several people have reviewed it, that it is more neutral, that several people have contributed to it and all
And
that.
it's
I
easily
think
true.
Joel and Martin came up with the idea of putting the pictures on the tutorials because that we needed a way to get people to do it and to get recognition for it.
Can I just do a quick shout out? If there's any programmers in here, I would like to attend the documentation sprint, and I would actually love to talk about the death of PHC for the documentation and try to talk about something new.
Bless you,
And
sir.
something
I would be
in between,
all for it. It's not that I dislike PHC as a product or anything like that. I just don't think that it's an appropriate
Right, whether
tool for us.
PHC is appropriate for plone.org or not, let me caution you about repeating that. There are a great many people who use PHC. PHC will not die even if plone.org stops using it.
That's fine.
It is
I
a
don't care about
well-maintained
the
product.
I just mean for Plone.
Okay, just
Yeah, we're just talking-
rumors get around in this community. People say death to archetypes, and then the next day there are 50 developers writing the mailing list saying, no,
Pitchforks and
no.
torches.
I said death to PHC on the Plone. documentation.
Yeah, just on plone.org.
Partial death.
Yes.
Okay.
Is there any effort going to multi-language documentation? Because the developers just like, it's all English, there's no problem at all.
Whenever somebody approaches us about wanting to translate documents, we let them, we say go for it.
Patches are
and also-
welcome.
Right, and we also help support like choosing the documents that are appropriate for translating. We can at least try to guide you in that direction.
We highly suggest that everybody translate the end user manual into your language.
Possible to put it on the plone.org site, or essentially starting
I thought that people were putting them on their like plone.org,
Their country sites?
their
I think
country
that's how they're
sites, yes.
doing it, but
I think that's where they're residing.
that's normally where folks get referred anyways, so
Yeah.
it's probably more likely to get found if you do that.
But I think there's been a tentative conclusion that it's unmaintainable to say use lingua plone for our documentation area. Sad, but we just can't figure out how to keep it maintained.
Over here?
Right. It sounds like we're having a problem of finding people in the community or encouraging the community to really participate in the documentation process. Why don't we do something like the Adopt a Highway in the US, where you would exchange visibility for whoever, which company is, saying yes for the next 12 months. I agree to maintain that section on the site about build out, and you put a little logo somewhere, and then it rotates. Next year it's another company, I mean, that's how I send my child to a co-op preschool, and that's how it works. At the beginning of each year, everybody gets assigned something. You get to pick. If you really want to do something specific, you pick which area you would like to volunteer in, and if you don't pick quick enough, then you get assigned something, and you can always negotiate. But this way, it would ensure that this is really community developed, and well, everybody would get a shot at doing something. So yes, for sure, maybe company A wouldn't do such a great job year one, but year two, company B would review what company A did. So altogether, I mean, you would have something that is probably of a good quality.
And I think
That's a good
that's an
idea.
important
I think
incentive to
we
give
should,
people some kind of recognition.
Yeah, it is,
And that's
we do. We
part
have
of the idea of the editorships, although they've been focused on people rather than companies, is that it would raise your visibility in the community to be the wrangler for a topic for a year.
Maybe there's a lighter weight way we can do it. Maybe we can bubble the top contributors on an article to the top, and if you want, you can corporatize it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something we should look into, because the documentation list has a lot of members on it, but very few actually actively participate, and that's something we really need to change.
I think we really are out of time.
We
Yeah,
really
I
are
think
out of
people-
time.
We're starting to get
Thanks,
aware
everybody.
that.
Where is the sprint?
Doc Sprint at the same place where everybody else is going to be in Arlington.
Right, and just real quick, Dylan J is going to be doing a talk momentarily.
Friends multiplier and sucking in external sites into plone.
Right, actually, I think there's 3 talks coming up in a moment. Is that correct?
Another one is how to serve plone pages 1,000,000 times faster using reposo.bfg, if I recall right.
And then Katie is doing a